those things were told to them in advance, and this was made very clearly as an emergency transitional camp, including the transitional shelters, with plans that had been pre-existing before the earthquake for an industrial park, for manufacturing, and all those things which we are going to still strongly advocate for. They are in a bad place, and a better bad place than this one. And this one is a better bad place than so many of the camps in this city. One of the advantages that we have is we have neighborhoods with the Ministry of Public Works and Transportation, along with UN Ops, sent out on a 2,000 structure a day inspection period to go through red, yellow, and green houses. Red being that are irrevocably damaged by the earthquake. Yellow, those that can be put back together. And green being not necessarily earthquake safe, but undamaged from this earthquake. And so in the communication to camp residents, as assistance packages build, as rubble removal in those neighborhoods that makes life miserable in the first place, and inaccessible in many cases. So many of these neighborhoods are sort of catacomb-like in buildings that you walk through alleys like this of both broken buildings, semi-broken buildings. And so what happens in all of these things is that the responsibility of any of the international relief organizations that are participating in relocations or returns is to very clearly and honestly communicate what the options are at all times. Because the standing, dangerous, and vulnerable option is to stay in these spontaneous camps.
Why did you have to turn to the Venezuelan president, Hugo Chavez, over your own president, Barack Obama?
Well, I don't know Barack Obama. I don't have his phone number. And frankly, it would not have been something I considered that I would be as a private citizen without a very, especially in the very superpower world that the United States is. There's a lot of regulation, and it's not likely that I would have within a few days been granted access to a large amount of IV pain medications. And so with Hugo Chavez, he's someone that knows me. I know him. He knows what my efforts would be here. And also, it was even in the case of what they donated and to an organization like ours, it was a kind of, I believe, a moral leap of faith, considering the circumstances. And I was able to describe to him the networking that we would be able to do and had done, so that we'd be able to make responsible and immediate use of those things. And that's not something that, for better and worse, is part of spontaneous disaster relief in the United States and access to narcotics. You
mentioned the factories that would be set up because Haitians want jobs.
Yeah.
There is concern that they could be setting up maquiladoras where, yes, they're desperate for jobs, but at any price. How do you guard against that?
Yeah, not at any price. I think that your being here, and any time there's media and responsible media here, is virtually more important than any aid organization's presence at all. With that alone, people in the United States would get to know the Haitian people and send the money right into their hands. They'd adopt neighborhoods, they'd adopt schools. So in terms of what the future is going to be, if we're just going to continue a culture of people making $1 to $2 a day, spending 45% of their annual income on their children's education because they care that much to have their children educated, but with only the access to substandard education, then if that doesn't change, it's only a pipe dream. People are going to have a life. They're going to have to share in the international language of what a real free life is, and we can't maintain the kind of we're grateful for a penny aspect simply in what becomes the kind of systemic punishment for people's strength. And that's what happens in a place like Haiti, where comfort's never been experienced on any level. There's no expectation or feeling of a right to it, but it isn't a luxury, it's a human right.
So here you are, a megastar in Hollywood. How have you brought your talents? What is it about what your experience has been that you can run a camp like this?
It's an awful lot like film production, it's just the stakes are a lot higher. So the choices you make with fluidity in film that you responsibly would call adjustments here are without whimsy and are very clearly adjustments to the daily needs that occur here. As an organization, one of the founding principles that I started with, despite the deficit it would put me in, was that we wouldn't take designated money. What we do is maintain maximum transparency. And so that, you know, if tomorrow the best thing for our organization to do is to recognize that we had degenerated tarps from the original distributions and to put another 8,000 tarps in our camp for a big rain. If suddenly there's a social unrest situation, we might want to take our funds and put it into security for the IDPs here. So we wanted to maintain that kind of flexibility, and that's so much about what filmmaking is. And then I think just being, you know, learning that in dealing with these kind of organizations that are dealing in, it's very competitive between NGOs, for example, as it is between studios, for example. There's a lot of schadenfreude, there's a lot of high school nonsense that we laugh about and we criticize in Hollywood, and here it's murder. It's a kind of passive murder. And so I think that in you know, simply being willing to talk very straight about what we see and hear, our best bet proposals, and put them on the table and not be shy about them, and then count on that like minds will coordinate where coordination in general doesn't exist.
When you talk about that competition being dangerous, not only dangerous, lethal here, can you be specific?
Yeah, I can be extremely specific. I don't have to name any of the organizations. I think people know what they are, that we expect as a culture in America to have, for example, in Haiti, you have this incredible earthquake and the disaster that it reaps. We see the agony and the death everywhere on the news, immediately. We all say, oh my God, what are we going to do? Well, we've got this organization, and we've got that organization, and we've got the other one, and we've got the other one. Who'd have thought that 4 months later, we would get a patient in our clinic, in our hospital here, a 15-year-old boy that became the first diagnosed case of diphtheria. When we come here as Americans, are inoculated for about 5 things. One of them is diphtheria. So here's this case, and diphtheria is endemic here. And none of the organizations, from international to national to American, no one had notified any of the hospitals. And none of the hospitals had asked, where do we get the immunoglobulin if we get a case of diphtheria? So, patient came in, we started looking for hospitals that would accept him. Nobody was prepared to accept him. We got kicked out of 4 hospitals, and we traveled with this boy in the back of an SUV for hours, from hospital to hospital, being kicked away. During that time, we had a phone campaign going. By the way, where do we get the immunoglobulin? We had been involved with every major hospital and clinic in this city. Nobody knew. We called the United States military, whose job it isn't to do that, and who, in fact, among all the organizations, had been the most directly decisive and effective to date. And this was about a 15-hour process. And I have a pretty good Rolodex. No one knew where to get it. And then, based on a kind of memory of somebody that was involved in one of these major organizations, we made a phone call, and we got in touch with somebody from CDC while they were in a restaurant in Petionville. And they happened to be sitting across from the person who ran the Promesse warehouse. And this is an immunoglobulin that has to be sent through a cold chain. And this was another thing that was exposed 4 months in. No cold chains have been set up.
What's a cold chain?
Cold chain, if you want to send tetanus diphtheria from the United States to here, it's going to have to stay cold all the way till injection. So then you get, so it's not centralized in one warehouse.